Hello everyone, my name is Alejandro Duto. Welcome to another ISDC video. Continuing with the exploration of the shipwrecks of Operation Crossroads in Bikini Atoll, it is time for us to talk about the Japanese battleship Nagato. Today the video will be divided into three main parts. Initially, we will do a general briefing of the dives on the Nagato, covering mainly the diving on the outside part of this large ship. With this cover, we will go into the water and dive the outside of the wreck. In the second part, we will return for a briefing on the penetration and the sectors that we managed to explore inside the boat. After that, we're going to go for the dive itself. Finally, and as usual, we will close with the rich history of the Nagato, which was one of the flagships of the Japanese Navy during World War II. For this particular video, we had some collaborators: Aaron Argrimson, Didier Folin-Grisel, Elmar Dete, Dan Dawson. Without further ado, let's talk about diving and history. Okay, so before going into the details of the diving, remember that an introductory video was made explaining in detail the whole expedition to Bikini, with more specific information regarding on how to dive these wrecks. The link of this video is in the description. The famous Japanese battleship Nagato, at the time of its construction, had 708 feet of length, that is 216 meters, by 95 feet in beam, which is 29 meters. Also, it carried 1,368 men. Now, at the time of its sinking, after several modifications, it had 738 feet, that is 225 meters of length, by 114 feet, that is 35 meters in beam. It also carried 1,736 men. Nagato was sunk by the second detonation, Baker, during Operation Crossroads, as we know. Nowadays, Nagato rests at a depth of 180 feet, that is 52-53 meters, and it's upside down with a slightly list to port side. The wreck is so massive that the upper part of it, that is the keel and the propellers, are at a depth of about 30 meters or 100 feet. During the dive itself, exploration is predominantly at sand level, and it is there where we find the most interesting parts on what was once the main deck. If we imagine a dive moving from bow to stern, we will see that the bow itself offers a very interesting view of the upturned wreck. As we move towards the stern, we see the forward guns that are still with the caps on. Then, before reaching the remains of the pagoda, we will see some access points to the interior that we will use later on for penetration. Right about the center of the wreck are the remains of what was once an imposing pagoda, which also housed the command bridge. As we will see in the story, the command bridge was destroyed by American attacks before the end of the war. And finally, around the stern, we see the iconic guns which we use for a photograph session. Now from there, if we move to the shallower part, the biggest draw is definitely the giant propellers, which in themselves are worth spending a good amount of time on. It is worth noting that the Nagato is one of the wrecks of Operation Crossroads that is losing the most oil. This can be seen when diving around the keel and on the upper part, where you can see the constant oil bubbling, which is a problem itself. In this image from a recent study, we can see the Nagato's fuel plum compared to the other shipwrecks being the largest of them. There would be enough material regarding the fuel problem of these shipwrecks to do an entire video about it. Okay, with all that said, let's go and dive the Nagato from the outside. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the diving on the outside. Now let's talk for a few minutes about the penetration diving on this wreck. Compared to what we did on the USS Saratoga, if you didn't see the video, the link is on the description, penetration of the Nagato was limited to her main deck and the first deck. When entering an upside-down wreck of this size, one must bear in mind that everything is turned around, like up is down and left is right. So having these references in mind adds up an extra layer of complexity to the dive. It is also worth noting that the structure of the Nagato is decaying. As we will see in the history segment, the Nagato already arrived at Bikini in really poor condition. Added to this, it withstood 2 atomic detonations and fell turned upside down, which is not how the structure of a ship is supposed to support its own weight. Additionally, let us remember the fact that it has been underwater for more than 75 years. With all this in mind, 2 penetrations were made on the 2 upper decks. The first, from the pagoda on the stern side and going from port to starboard. Here, a former kitchen was visited where rice husks and turtle shells can be seen, as well as several corridors and rooms. The second part of the penetration was on the opposite direction, from starboard to port. The exit point was on the pagoda itself, practically at the stern guns. Here we visited the officers' quarters. So if you're ready, let's get back in the water. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the dive. Now let's talk about the history of the Nagato. The Nagato was named after the Nagato province in Japan and was ordered on May 12, 1916. Nagato was launched on November 9, 1919 by Admiral Kato Tomosaburo, completed on November 15, 1920, and commissioned 10 days later with Captain Nobutaro Lida in command. Nagato was assigned to the 1st Battleship Division and became the flagship of Rear Admiral Sojiro Tochinai. During the pre-war years, the Nagato aided the victims from the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923, ran several practices on the Tokyo Bay, participated in airplane takeoff tests, and mainly became a training ship. Later on, the ship participated in an Imperial Fleet review on October 11, 1940, and she was refitted in early 1941 in preparation for war. On December 2, 1941, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto issued the code phrase NIITAKA-YAMA NOBORE, which is climb Mount Niitaka from Nagato, which was anchored at Hashirajima, to signal the first air fleet, Kudo-butai, in the North Pacific to proceed with the attack on Pearl Harbor. This, as we know, started the war between Japan and the US, and on December the 8th, the Nagato sorted for the Bonin Islands along with Mutsu and the battleships Yuga, Yamashiro, Fuso, Ise of the Battleship Division 2, and the flight carrier Hosho as distance cover for the withdrawal of the fleet attacking Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto transferred his flag to the new battleship Yamato on February 12, 1942. Then Nagato was briefly refitted between March 15th and April 9th at Kure. In June 1942, Nagato, commanded by Captain Hideo Yano, was assigned to the main body of the First Fleet during the Battle of Midway, together with the Yamato, Mutsu, Hosho, and the light cruiser Sendai, 9 destroyers, and 4 auxiliary ships. Following the loss of all 4 carriers of the First Air Fleet, Yamamoto attempted to lure the American forces west to within range of the Japanese air groups on Wake Island. Also, he intended a night engagement with his surface forces, but the American forces withdrew and Nagato saw no action that day. On July 14th, the ship was transferred to Battleship Division 2 and she became the flagship of the First Fleet. Nagato remained in Japanese waters training until August of 1943. That month, Nagato, Yamato, Fuso, and the escort carrier Taiyo, also escorted by 2 heavy cruisers and 5 destroyers, transferred to Truk in the Caroline Islands. In response to the carrier raid in Tarawa on September 18th, Nagato and much of the fleet sorted to NIITAKA to search for the American forces before they returned to Truk on September 23rd, having failed to locate them. Later on, the Japanese intercepted some American radio traffic that suggested an attack on Wake Island. And on October 17th, Nagato and the bulk of the First Fleet sailed to NIITAKA to be in a position to intercept such attack. The fleet arrived on October 19th, waited for 4 days, and then traveled back to Truk on October 23rd. On February 1st, 1944, Nagato departed Truk with Fuso to avoid an American air raid and arrived at Palau on February 4th. They again departed from Palau on February 16th to escape another air raid. The ships arrived on February 21st at Linga Island near Singapore, and the ship became the flagship of Vice Admiral Motome Ugaki, commander of the Battleship Division 1, until he transferred his flag to Yamato on May 5. The ship remained at Linga training until May 11th, when she was transferred to Tawi-Tawi on May the 12th. The division was now assigned to the 1st Mobile Fleet under the command of Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Nagato escorted the aircraft carriers Junyo, Hijo, and the light carrier Ryuho. The ship was strafed by American aircraft during the battle, but was not damaged or suffered any casualties. After that, Nagato continued to Kure, where she was refitted with additional radars and a light anti-air guns. Undocked on July 8th, Nagato loaded a regiment of the 28th Infantry Division the following day and delivered them to Okinawa on July 11th. She then arrived at Linga via Manila on July the 20th. Now let's talk a little bit about the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which is kind of important and relevant for the Nagato story. By October 18th, Nagato sailed for Brunei Bay in Borneo to join the main Japanese fleet in preparation for Operation Shaw I, the counterattack planned against the American landings at Leyte. The Japanese plan called for Ozawa's carrier forces to lure American carrier fleets north of Leyte so that the Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's 1st Division Force, also known as Center Force, could enter Leyte Gulf and destroy American forces landing on the island. Nagato, together with the rest of Kurita's force, departed Brunei for the Philippines on October 22nd. There was a battle on the Sibuyan Sea on October 24th, where Nagato was attacked by multiple waves of American dive bombers and fighters. Nagato was hit by 2 bombs dropped by planes from the fleet carrier USS Franklin and the light carrier USS Cabot. That attack disabled Nagato for 24 minutes and killed 52 men. On the morning of October 25th, the 1st Diversion Force passed through San Bernardino Strait and headed for the Leyte Gulf to attack the American forces supporting the invasion. In the Battle of Samar, Nagato engaged the escort carriers and destroyers of Task Group 7743. It was right there at 6:01 that Nagato opened fire on 3 escort carriers, which was the first time she had ever fired her guns at enemy ship, but missed. At 6:54, the destroyer USS Herman fired a spread of torpedoes at the fast battleship Haruna. The torpedoes missed Haruna and headed for Yamato and Nagato, which were on a parallel course. The 2 battleships were forced 10 miles away from the engagement before the torpedoes ran out of fuel. After several back and forth during that battle, at 12:43, Nagato was hit in the bow by 2 bombs, but damage was not severe. As it retreated to Brunei on October 26, the Japanese fleet came under repeated air attacks. Now let's talk about the final days of the war for the Nagato. On November 15, 1944, the ship was assigned to Battleship Division 3 on the 2nd Fleet. After an aerial attack at Brunei on November 16, Nagato, Yamato, and the fast battleship Kong left the following day, bound to Kure. En route, the Congo and one of the escorting destroyers were sunk by the USS Sea Lion on November 21st. On November 25th, Nagato arrived at Yokosuka in Japan for repairs. Lack of fuel and materials meant that she could not be brought back into service, and she was turned into a floating anti-aircraft battery with some refitting done to cover that purpose. By February 10, 1945, she was assigned to the Yokosuka Naval District as a coastal defense ship. Later on, by April the 20th, Nagato was reduced to reserve. In June 1945, all of her secondary guns and about half of her anti-aircraft armament was moved ashore, together with her rangefinders and searchlights. On July 18, 1945, the ship was attacked by fighter and torpedo bombers from 5 American carriers as part of Admiral William Halsey Jr.'s campaign to destroy all of the Japanese lasting capital ships. Nagato was hit by 2 bombs. The first 500-pound bomb struck on the bridge and killed Otsuka, the executive officer, and 12 sailors when it detonated upon hitting the roof of the conning tower. The second 500-pound bomb struck the deck aft of the mainmast. To convince the Americans that Nagato had been badly damaged by the attack, her damage was left unrepaired, and some of her ballast tanks were pumped full of seawater to make it sit deeper and make it look like it sunk on the harbor. So Japan surrendered, the war came to an end, and then sailors of the battleship USS Iowa, the underwater demolition team 18, and the high-speed transport USS Horace A. Buss secured the battleship on August 30th after the occupation began, and Captain Thomas J. Flynn, executive officer of the Iowa, assumed command. By the time the war ended, Nagato was the only Japanese battleship still afloat. She was stricken from the Navy list on September 15th. Now let's fast forward to 1946, where the ship was selected to participate as a target ship on Operation Crossroads. a series of nuclear weapon tests held at Bikini Atoll, as we all know. In mid-March, Nagato departed Yokosuka for NIITAKA under the command of Captain WWII, with an American crew of about 180 men supplementing her Japanese crew. I must say that that trip itself is a story on its own. The ship was only capable of a speed of 10 knots from her 2 operating propeller shafts. Her hull had not been repaired from the underwater damage sustained during the attack on July 18, 1945, and she leaked enough that her pumps could not keep her up. Nagato's consort, the light cruiser Sakawa, broke down on March 28th, and Nagato attempted to take her in tow, but one of her boilers malfunctioned and the ship ran out of fuel in bad weather. By the time tugboats from NIITAKA arrived on March 30th, the ship had a list of 7 degrees to port. When Nagato reached NIITAKA on April 4th, it received temporary repairs so it could continue the trip to Bikini. Operation Crossroads began with Test Able, an airburst, on July 1st, and Nagato was 100 and 500 meters, that is 1,600 yards, from ground zero. It was only lightly damaged by that bomb. For Test Baker, the underwater explosion, the ship was positioned 870 meters, that is 950 yards, from ground zero. Nagato rode the tsunami from that explosion with little apparent damage. She had a slight starboard list of around 2 degrees after the tsunami dissipated. Her list gradually increased over the next 5 days, and she capsized and sunk during the night of July 29th. Well, that brings us to the end of the Nagato story. I hope you liked the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please leave us a comment, give us a like, and if you haven't done so, please remember to subscribe. Once again, thank you for being there, and I'll see you on the video of the Prinz Eugen.